Peonage was a type of involuntary servitude of laborers having little control over their employment conditions. Peonage existed historically during the colonial period, especially in Latin America and areas of Spanish rule. English usage: the English words peon and peonage were derived from the Spanish word, and have a variety of meanings related to the Spanish usage, as well as some other meanings. In addition to the meaning of forced laborer, a peon may also be a person with little authority, often assigned unskilled tasks. An underling or otherwise a personage who is subject to the whims of their overseers. In this sense, peon can be used in either a derogatory or self-effacing context. However, the term has a historical basis and usage related to much more severe conditions of forced labor. American English: in a historical and legal sense, peon generally referred to someone working in an unfree labor system. The word often implied debt bondage and/or indentured servitude. There are other usages in contemporary cultures. South Asian English: a peon is an office boy, an attendant, or an orderly, a person kept around for odd jobs or its wood, especially when used in boat building. Shanghai: among native Chinese working in firms where English is spoken, the word has been phonetically reinterpreted as peon, and refers to a worker with little authority, who suffers indignities from superiors. Computing slang: a peon is an unprivileged user, a person without special privileges on a computer system. The other extreme is super user. Financial trading slang: a peon is a market participant who trades in small quantities or a small account. Peonage: the origin of this form of involuntary servitude goes back to the Spanish conquest of Mexico, when conquistadors forced natives to work for Spanish planters and mine operators. Peonage was prevalent in Spanish America, especially in the countries of Mexico, Guatemala, Ecuador, and Peru. It remains an important part of social life, as among the Urarina of the Peruvian Amazon. After the American Civil War, peonage developed in the southern United States. Poor white farmers and freedmen who could not afford their own land would farm another person's land, exchanging labor for a share of the crops. This was called sharecropping, and initially the benefits were mutual. The landowner would pay for the seeds and tools in exchange for a percentage of the money earned from the crop and a portion of the crop. As time passed, many landowners began to abuse the system. The landowner would force the tenant farmer to buy seeds and tools from the landowner unregistered trademark store, which often had inflated prices. As sharecroppers were often illiterate, they had to depend on the books and accounting by the landowner and his staff. Other tactics included debiting expenses against the sharecropper's profits after the crop was harvested and miscalculating the net profit from the harvest, thereby keeping the sharecropper in perpetual debt to the landowner. Since the tenant farmers could not offset the costs, they were forced into involuntary labor due to the debts they owed the landowner. Southern states passed black codes to control the movement of freedmen and to try to gain their labor for planters. They often declared as vagrants someone who was unemployed, even if between jobs. They tried to restrict the movement of freedmen between rural areas and cities, to between towns. Under such laws, local officials arbitrarily arrested tens of thousands of freedmen and charged them with fines and the court costs of their cases. White merchants, farmers, and business owners could pay their debts, and the prisoner had to work off the debt. Prisoners were leased as laborers to owners and operators of coal mines, lumber camps, brickyards, railroads, quarries, and farm plantations, with the revenues for their labor going to the states. Government officials leased imprisoned blacks and whites to small-town entrepreneurs, provincial farmers, and dozens of corporations looking for cheap labor. Their labor was repeatedly bought and sold for decades after the official abolition of American slavery. Southern states and private businesses boomed with this free labor. It is estimated that up to 40% of blacks in the South were imprisoned in peonage in the beginning of the 20th century. Overseers and owners often used severe deprivation, beatings, whippings, and other abuse as discipline against the workers. After the Civil War, the 13th Amendment prohibited involuntary servitude such as peonage for all but convicted criminals. Congress also passed various laws to protect the constitutional rights of Southern blacks, making those who violated such rights by conspiracy, by trespass, or in disguise, guilty of an offense punishable by 10 years in prison and civil disability. Unlawful use of state law to subvert rights under the federal constitution was made punishable by fine or a year's imprisonment. Until the 1960s, sharecroppers in southern states were forced to continue working to pay off old debts or to pay taxes. Southern states allowed this in order to preserve sharecropping. In October 1910, Florida sugarcane plantation planter Edgar Watson was shot and killed by his own neighbors. According to legend, he would use peonage, Native American and Negro help, and then would pay his workers by killing them. His story was fictionalized by writer Peter Matthiessen in his Lost River trilogy, later remade into Shadow Country. The following reported court cases involving peonage. 1903, South Dakota, a 17-year-old girl was reported to have been sold into peonage at the age of 2 by her own father. 1904, Alabama, 10 persons indicted for holding black and white persons in peonage. John W. Pace of Alabama, the father of peonage, pardoned by his friend President Theodore Roosevelt in 1906. Edward McCree of Georgia legislature, owner of 37,000 acres of land, indicted on 13 charges, pled guilty to first charge and paid a $1,000 fine. 1906, 5 officials of Jackson Lumber Company sentenced in Pensacola, Florida to 7 years in prison. 1916, 2 men found guilty in Lexington County, South Carolina of trying to force a white man into peonage. Each fined $500 and sentenced to a year and day in jail. 1921, Hawaiian sugar plantation owners try to legalize peonage of Chinese workers. In 1921, Georgia farmer John S. Williams and his black overseer Clyde Manning were convicted in the deaths of 11 blacks working as peons in Williams' farm. Williams was the only white farmer convicted for killing black peons between 1877 and 1966. Because of the Spanish tradition, peonage was still widespread in New Mexico after the U.S. Civil War. Because New Mexico laws supported peonage, the U.S. Congress passed an anti-peonage law on March 2, 1867 as follows, Sec. 1990. The holding of any person to service or labor under the system known as peonage is abolished and forever prohibited in the territory of New Mexico, or in any other territory or state of the United States. And all acts, laws, are made to establish, maintain, or enforce, directly or indirectly, the voluntary or involuntary service or labor of any persons as peons, in liquidation of any debt or obligation, or otherwise, are declared null and void. The current version of this statute is codified at Chapter 21I of 42 U.S.C. A.A. millisecond 1994 and makes no specific mention of New Mexico. See also, debt bondage, feudalism, peasant, proletariat, serfdom, social class, Hodges v. United States, 203 U.S. 1, Bailey v. Alabama, 219 U.S. 219, Boy Slaves, References. External links, Conversation with Erminio Orellana mini-documentary by Jorge Urzan, 42 U.S.C. a Section 1994, Peonage abolished, FBI.gov, further reading, Daniel, Pete. The Shadow of Slavery, Peonage in the South, 1901 to 1969. New York, Oxford University Press. ISBN A0-19-519742-9. Reynolds, Aaron, Inside the Jackson Tract, The Battle Over Peonage Labor Camps in Southern Alabama, 1906, Southern Spaces, January 21, 2013. Hing, Jeannie M., ed. Shadows over Sunnyside, An Arkansas Plantation in Transition, 1830–1945, Fayetteville, University of Arkansas Press, 1993. Woodruff, Nan Elizabeth. American Congo, The African American Freedom Struggle in the Delta, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard University Press, 2003.